Welcome back to the Criminal Connection podcast. My name's Terry Stone, aka the Podfather. This week's episode is a continuation of Chapter 10, Gangsters, Pranksters, and Raving Lunatics. There are enough gangster stories that have been circulating for years. You know, people have been interviewed on TV about them and have actually told porkies to better their own reputation. With so much bollocks and falseness, it's little wonder that people see that lifestyle as full of petty, squabbling, backstabbing and fucking wannabes telling lies and bullshitting everyone. Speaking of which, I know this sounds like the opening line to a terrible joke, but bear with me. There was this African prince once called something unpronounceable. His nickname was Ix. He ran an organisation called Dance Planet. And he always seemed like a nice fella. Well, put it this way, out of all the African princes I knew, he was the one I got on with the best. And to be honest, I took him at face value. You know, he had a few bad habits. Well, he was bang on it. But look, everybody was entitled to their vices. And being a dodgy geezer can always be a rumour. How wrong can you be? I mean, this guy turned out to be a right dog. I've been friendly off and on with him for years. You know, we weren't mates, but we saw each other at a rave. And he was usually quite good for a laugh. He placed an advert in my magazine for one of his events and conveniently forgot to pay the invoice. After 3 or 4 months, I started phoning him and sending repeat invoices. It wasn't a lot of dough. In fact, it was the princely sum of £300. But to be honest, it was the principle that mattered to me. You know, I was actually pretty disgusted. It wasn't the kind of shit that I expected, to be honest, especially from somebody that I knew who was supposed to be a friend, you know? And we were in the same business. And you don't do that to people you know or anyone else in my book. Well, at least I'd found out what he was like before he owed me a lot of fucking money. So you have to be grateful that he only owed £300. He was dodging my calls and ignoring my letters until one day he finally answered his phone. And I couldn't hold back. I said, "Where's my fucking money, you fucking cunt? Why would you steal £300 from me?" As opening lines go, it wasn't that bad. He was lucky we weren't talking face to face, as I'd had plenty of time stewing over this £300, and I'd probably have taken his head off if he'd have fucking spoken to me like that face to face. Amazingly, he tried to brazen out. He said, "I'm not going to pay you. And what are you going to do about it?" And I told him, "Look, if I ever see you at one of these clubs or one of these events, you'll see what I'm going to do about it. We'll have a fucking punch up and sort it out." It didn't really make any difference. You know, he still wasn't paying, so I put the phone down, mystified. I couldn't believe that he was willing to actually have a fight with me over £300 that he owed me. I mean, maybe he thought I was bluffing. Maybe he was right, you know. Maybe I might have given him a slap if I'd have run into him a day or two later. But would I really have kicked him all around the fucking room for a poxy few quid? I doubt it. I may be a bit daft at times. I may be a bit angry at times or lose my temper at times. But I certainly wasn't stupid, and I wouldn't fucking risk going to prison for fucking £300. My aim really was to just get him to fucking pay. And I actually thought I might actually go to one of his shitty events and just say, "I need my fucking £300. Yeah, it was just a nice bit of mental torture for him. For the next few days, I'd rant onto anyone who listened that I wanted to fucking beat him up. He's a cunt. He's knocked me for £300, blah, 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 blah. Thinking that the more people knew about it and the more people went back to him and said, "Oh, you know, I can't believe you haven't paid Terry, blah, blah, blah," the more chances are he would just pay me the money to fucking shut me up. I thought I'd give him one last chance to pay before putting this all to bed. So I phoned him again to see if no was still his final answer. And after I had a while to think it over, he didn't pick up. So I had to assume his original reply still stood. I didn't want to waste any more time or money running up my phone bill ringing this fucking idiot. And there, the story ought to have ended. Instead, the next day, the CID hammered on my front door while I was asleep. 2 of them burst in, and without so much as a "Good morning, Terry," one of them showed me a search warrant. "You're being arrested for aggravated burglary and GBH with intent," he said. Fuck me. I mean, those were serious charges with jail time attached. To be honest, when I heard that, it did actually stop me in my tracks a bit. Aggravated burglary, GBH with intent. "I think you got the wrong man, officers," I said. But they ignored me and started turning my house upside down. I watched them feeling pretty bloody amazed. I wondered if Crime Watch had just been on and I looked like some geezer who'd been on there. I was like mystified by this, and I was like, "Look, can I help you at all? What is it you're looking for?" As I was watching and rooting through all my cupboards. "If you tell me what you're looking for, I might be able to assist you. We're searching for weapons, knuckle dusters, blood-stained clothing," said one of them. "Ah," I said, "in that case, I don't think I can help you. You won't find anything like that here. Honestly, I really think you must have the wrong man." I'm a kind of person who tends to make light of difficult situations. Sometimes I actually do fuck myself up with bad taste jokes intended to lighten the mood. And this was one of those times. So I reached for my dummy knife and shouted, "You'll never take me alive, cuppers." And I stabbed one of them. He looked at me like I was a fucking right twat, and it didn't lighten the mood at all. Far from it. Looking back, I mean, that was no surprise. I mean, I'm not a dangerous knife-wielding mentalist, but how would they expect you to know that? I'm lucky they weren't armed, and I'm lucky that they actually had a sense of humour. Otherwise, they'd have probably arrested me for assault on a police officer. I probably would have been shot dead in my own bedroom. After ransacking the entire house, they didn't find any weapons or bloodstained clothing, as predicted by yours truly. But they didn't want to be reminded of that, so I kept stum. They were intrigued when they discovered a safe. Okay, a safe is a bit unusual, but they're not that uncommon. I mean, I bought tens of thousands of pounds home with me on weekends, and I obviously couldn't put that under the mattress. When I opened it, they had a look inside, and they started drooling. They'd hit the jackpot. There before them was a Browning 9mm handgun with 200 rounds of ammunition. Okay, again, a gun is a fairly unusual thing to have in your house, but this was in the days before handguns were illegal. And as I've said, I held it perfectly legitimately. I had a license for it. I went shooting regularly. It was no big deal to me, just a pastime that I enjoyed. To these two, it was like they caught Bernardo Provenzano. Naturally, I made a joke out of it. I mean, someone had to break the silence. I said, the tools of the trade. I'm a professional hitman, you see. Not a great job in some ways, but, you know, it pays well. When will I learn not to make inappropriate comments and jokes? These guys were a tough crowd, these boys. The only thing missing was tumbleweed blowing past. Terry's tip of the day. If your house is raided early doors by the police, do not pretend to attack them with a toy knife. And do not joke about being a hitman when they find your gun and ammunition in your safe. It's just not worth it. They asked me if I had a license. I said yes. I had to show them my license, and unsurprisingly, they showed me to their car. They didn't cuff me. I think they realised that I wasn't likely to get violent. But they did drive me to Woking Police Station. I waited there for nearly 5 hours before they carted me off up to Oxford Police Station. I wasn't laughing anymore. I was beginning to realise that this was no ordinary arrest. Although they wouldn't give me the actual details, something wasn't right. And I had a bad feeling inside. At Oxford, they arranged for a duty solicitor who filled me in. A detective inspector came into the interview room and sat down opposite us. It's like this, he said. First off, due to the seriousness of the charge and their concerns about your behaviour, we're impounding your firearm and ammunition. Your licence is being revoked. Okay, I said. I mean, I can argue about the gun later. What is this all about? He started talking about the African prince, and then my brain went into overload. Fucking X. He was badly beaten in his own house. Great, I thought. Couldn't have happened to a nicer bloke. But why have I been arrested, I said. The injured party has named you as being in a group of 4 men who carried out the assault. I mean, fuck me, what a stupid cunt. Apparently, a few weeks earlier, Dave Courney, 2 unnamed heavy, and me had driven to Oxford in a white diesel saloon car looking for him for £300. And then once we miraculously found his house, and for the record, I'd never been to his house and he never gave me his address. So how would I fucking know where he lived? We'd apparently run up to his door and kicked it in broad daylight and beat the shit out of him. Allegedly, we were all wearing like double knuckle dusters at the time, hence the early morning search of my gaff. You're joking, I said, which was a bit of a role reversal from earlier, but they were deadly serious. And I tell you what, it certainly didn't feel very funny being in my shoes. Like I said, you really have got the wrong man here. I haven't been anywhere near Oxford with Dave Courtney or anyone else. I mean, I don't know what his game is, but he's taking a piss. I mean, look, he owed me £300. Yes, I was pissed off. You know, I'm sure you would be too, but think about it. Driving to Oxford, taking 3 heavies with me, expenses, petrol, wages, money. Even if I wanted to do it, which I didn't, it would have cost me a lot more than what I was owed. They looked at me blankly. And why would I take 3 other guys with me, I said. I've actually collected debts for a living. I wouldn't have had much trouble with him. I wouldn't have needed to take 3 guys with me. I mean, it's absurd and slightly insulting. And anyway, if 4 blokes had teamed up on him using dusters, he would either be dead or close to it or intensive care. You know, it just doesn't make any sense. It doesn't add up. I didn't seem that impressed with all that, though, and they just kept asking me questions, you know. What about the white diesel saloon car identified by the injured party? You've got one of those, a Seat Toledo. It was true. I did have a battered old diesel Toledo. One that I used as a runaround because it cost fuck all to run. And I could do all my picking up and dropping off in it. And I used to have Murray driving it. And I'd also let Francis drive it. You know, I didn't want my proper fucking car getting weighed down with flyers, getting keyed and doing 1,000,000 miles on the clock. I knew 100% I hadn't been up to Oxford in it on the day in question. But it did worry me a bit. Some of the boys use it from time to time too. Maybe, yeah, one of them just thought, fuck it, we're going to collect the money. Because, I mean, I was ranting and raving about it. I was upset that this guy had fucking not paid me and fucked me about, yeah? So in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, I wonder whether one of these fucking guys has gone up in that car and done something without me knowing, thinking he's doing me some sort of favour. I hope and pray to fuck that I hadn't done that. What about the car then? I was a copper. Unsure, I declined to comment. I didn't want to say anything that could drop me or anybody else in the shit. Where were you on the day in question? I can't remember, I said. I was fairly sure I'd been in a meeting with a good friend of mine, Stuart Reed, who used to run the Eclipse Rave Club in Coventry. For those that don't know, Stuart had previous firearms offences and served time for them. If I named him and they did their poking around, it would look like a dodgy meeting between Terry and a criminal mastermind. They always assumed the worst, and I didn't want to fuel that fire. Added to that, I have got a fucking shit memory. It was possible I was wrong. You know, if I had to change my story later, it would look like I was lying to cover something up. So I thought, when I get out of here, I'm going to actually retrace everything, and I'm actually going to make sure that I was where I was saying I was, and I've got the dates and times right. It's always better to make sure that Stuart had recalled meeting me and warn him that I needed to name him as somebody I'd met that day, rather than them just turn up at his house. The questions kept coming, and I kept batting them back. I knew I had nothing to hide, and I was sure this was just a simple case of someone's gone round there and fucking bashed him up because he's obviously owed him a load of money. And because I had actually rung him up and I shouted and screamed at him and said I was going to beat him up, I get the fucking blame for it. There's no doubt somebody had gone round there and fucking beaten him up. You know, it wasn't really that surprising. I mean, he's just that type of guy who rubbed people up the wrong way and made enemies. He'd obviously upset someone and they'd fucked him up. And if I'd found out who it was, I'll be honest with you, I'd have bought him a fucking pint. All I knew was it wasn't me. So whatever this silly sod was saying, I know maybe he wanted revenge for the fucking phone threats and a bit of compensation along the way. Who knows? The main question was now, could I convince the police of my innocence?
VIP security services have been established for 35 years. VIP Security offers a personal security service to escort you, your family and your friends, whether on business or out for the evening. Protect what's important to you. We're watching you while others are watching us. Prevention is always better than the cure. You're in safe hands. Security solutions across Essex, London and the home counties.
There was a break in proceeding and I had a quick chat with the duty solicitor. I was still fairly confident this would all get sorted out. But you have to ask the question, don't you? You know, what's the worst thing that can happen here, I asked. Well, if you're convicted with both those charges, you're probably looking at a minimum of 5 years, he said. 5 fucking years? I mean, that was a reality check. My heart sank. I closed my eyes and I let those words wash over me. I mean, what a fucking nightmare. You know, when you see films where this happens, you know, you sort of think, just tell them you didn't do it, you know, and they'll believe you. The innocent man shouldn't go to jail, you know. And you can't ever imagine this happening to you. And for most people, this will never happen. But now it was happening to me. And no one would listen, you know. I was fucking Richard Kimball in The Fugitive. I was released on bail and told where the taxi rank was. I hope the police are better mannered these days, fucking hell. I made a few phone calls when I eventually got home. There were a few lines of inquiries on my own that I could pursue. First, the car. Here I got lucky. Frances Williams, my accountant, got her diary out. Turns out she'd had her car in the garage on the day that the beating had happened. This was before courtesy cars were invented. You literally had to fend yourself or borrow one from a mate for a couple of days. So she phoned one of the boys, bothered to Toledo and solved her temporarily transport problem. Frances was a respectable chartered accountant. She was a professional woman, not a rave promoter with halls of dodgy mates. That gave the vehicle an alibi for starters. What about one for me? I checked my own diary. Yep, I've been meeting Stuart Reed about tape pack distribution. So I called Stuart up to check. He would be happy to confirm everything. I mean, it sounds fucking mad now, right? Asking someone that you'd had a meeting with a few weeks ago, if you actually did have the meeting with them, and are they happy to say that? But to be honest, the entire case was just crazy. It was off its head in the first place. Stuart was willing to be a witness to prove that I couldn't have been in Oxford. And I thanked him, putting the phone down with an amazing sense of relief. My next call was to the police station. I told them about the car, where I was and who I was with. This obviously proves the whole thing is rubbish. Surely, I said, I was in a different part of the country and the car it says was being used by a respectable professional person. So that must be enough evidence to drop the case. No chance. It was all in the legal system by then, a very fucking slow legal system. At least the copper told me that he'd made a note of the phone conversation and it would go into my file. Great. Well, thanks for your help, officer. It took a further 9 months for the case to come to actual trial at Crown Court. 9 months of anguish, wondering what the outcome would be. And women complained about 9 months of pregnancy. During that time, the CID paid Stuart a visit. Apparently, they advised him, because of his criminal record, no one would believe him in court, and they actually advised him not to bother turning up, or they would nick him for perjury. I mean, this is charming stuff, right? Naturally, he told them to fuck off. They also visited Frances to make sure that her story was correct. Naturally, she asked them to leave. I was unable to apply for legal aid because I've always earned money and paid my taxes. This meant that I'd have to pay for my own legal representation, forking out for a barrister, forking out for a solicitor to defend me. The estimated cost for all this at the time came to £5,000. This idiot was starting to cost me a lot of money, and it made me even more determined that he wouldn't cost me my freedom as well. If I was somehow found guilty, I was looking at 5 years in prison. 5 years of my life could be wasted because some African prince placed an advert in my magazine and refused to pay £300. And all I did was phone him up a few times to get my money back and swear at him down the phone a lot and tell a few people that I wanted to fucking punch him in the face when I saw him. My barrister was called Jane Terry. After our first meeting, she painted a pretty serious picture. To be honest, Terry, she said, the fact you didn't tell the police in the interview where your car was and where you were on the day in question will go against you in court. But even with the alibis and the witnesses, you've only got a 50-50 chance of winning because it will all just come down to who the jury believes. If they believe you, you win, you walk. If they believe X, you go to jail. Now, this was a fucking major downer. There was no point Jane bullshitting me. It felt like the odds were massively stacked against me. I was torturing myself every fucking day, wondering how I ended up in this shit. I've seen dozens of people go to prison for so many reasons, mainly silly ones. I can't think of many things worth losing your fucking freedom for. I've actually heard people say they happily go to jail for beating someone up. Why? What's the attraction? I don't understand it. If someone owes you 300 quid, is it worth beating the fuck out of him and going to prison for 5 years? Let's say on a 5-year stretch you did 3 for good behaviour. That makes your freedom worth £100 a year. And if you actually add it up, that's less than £2 a week. In fact, if you've got no home, no family, no life, then prison doesn't seem that bad. Maybe it's a masculine thing to sound like you'd be willing to be sent down on the principle that you clump someone for doing you wrong. I don't know. I've actually cringed when mates of mine have had a laugh and a joke in court thinking it would get them off. They've said things like, yeah, I broke his jaw, but he's a cunt. You can make a jury laugh. You could try to make a judge laugh. But at the end of the day, they're still going to lock you up. They don't let you off for being funny, and they don't send you to a special clown prison for funny criminals either. The whole experience, for me, the waiting game, took me right to the edge of sanity. I had to drag myself round each morning, make a real effort to function and take every potion I could to find the energy to keep my levels boosted up. And it just wasn't working because my brain felt alert, but my body just wasn't interested. I had an active mind, passive body, and a total lack of motivation. Not a good combination. My sleep pattern was all over the place, and I was in this endless cycle of misery. The closer we got to the trial, the worse I felt, the more drained I felt. The more I convinced myself that the worst was going to happen. Before, I'd been the most optimistic person around. Now I was totally deflated, and I couldn't see a bright side to anything. Imagine you're sinking in quicksand and struggling to hang on to a branch to save yourself. That's what it felt like. I was sinking, but I just couldn't be bothered to reach out for the branches. At my next legal meeting, I was told to grow my hair, get some reading glasses, and buy myself a light grey coloured suit. When I asked why, the answer was, because you look like trouble and first impressions count, which made me laugh. Fair enough. Jane was the expert and I was more than willing to take any advice to increase my chances. Within a few months, I transformed myself into a right geek, part teacher, part civil servant. I felt sure I got the image right because when I walked down the road, most of my mates didn't even recognise me in the street. I made arrangements for my mum to take control of the business. I detailed everything that I did from A to Z, how to run this, how to run that, how procedures worked, who to deal with, who to call, who to see if this happened, if there were any problems. She could probably have managed to keep it all ticking over, but I knew that without me driving it and being there to keep an eye on the business, there would be plenty of vultures waiting to swoop. My mum, God bless her, was willing to take them all on single-handedly. She would have done anything to help, you know. Bet she'd have gone round and topped that fella to get me out of this mess. As the case approached, I moved from fatalism to slight optimism. I had to show determination and fight for what was mine. If being innocent until being proved guilty really existed, I had to play it cool. He was the one who had to do all the work. I started to feel like I had a fucking chance of winning. I actually had a phone call from him a few days before the case, which really confirmed it. He told me that if I gave him 10 grand, he wouldn't turn up for the trial and I'd get off. I knew in that instant that he didn't fancy his chances of winning. Listen, you piece of shit, I said. I'd rather pay someone 10 grand to kill you and bury you. Don't ever fucking phone me again. I'll see you in court. February 1998, non-paying versus Mr Turbo at Oxford Crown Court. I sat at the back of him and I listened to the prosecution outline the case to the judge without the jury present. I mean, this guy really fucking went for it, you know, launching into a lecture about the craze and Dave Courney, and organised crime and how I was involved in, you know, debt collecting. And I mean, just, you know, I mean, Dave's fucking book again, you know, when will this fucking end, you know? The lawyer even convinced me, even if I had the Pope as a character witness, no one's going to fucking believe me after they've heard that. I knew at that point I was going to jail. The judge, thank God, uses this part of the trial to say whether the speeches are all right or need to be changed. Now, Jane knew what she was doing. She objected to the opening statement. It's Mr Turbo who is on trial today, Your Honour, she said. Not the Craze, not Dave Courney. Mr Turbo has never even met the Cray twins, right? And also, I had no criminal record. So, you know, I was just a normal person. And these names were being used to associate and scare the jury, basically, so that the prosecution would have been able to influence the jury by tarring me with that same brush. We also managed to get the charges reduced as well, because we managed to get a police doctor who did a lot of work with the Metropolitan Police, and he said that the injuries that Hicks had sustained were not concurrent with 4 men wearing knuckle dusters punching fuck out of him. In his words, not mine. As a result of this information, the judge dropped my charge from aggravated burglary with all the trimmings down to ABH. That still carried a maximum sentence of 5 years, and Jane warned me that the judge would probably issue the full 5 given the circumstances if I was found guilty. I try not to take this with negativity. You know, I wasn't a criminal. Someone told me that a defeatist attitude in court will only lead to one place, and I had to be aware of this at all times. The jury came in and we were off. The CID geezer was called up and he and the barrister reconstructed my arrest interview. The CID played himself and the barrister played me as they read a transcript. It was a struggle to work out whether this was a courtroom or a fucking pantomime. Here's my own little reconstruction for you at home.
I want to say a huge thanks to our sponsors, Fragrance du Bois. Now, for those of you that don't know about Fragrance du Bois, where have you been? It is one of the leading luxury fragrances, only available in Harrods, Selfridges and Neiman Marcus in New York. They've got so many different fragrances for men, for women. All of the fragrances are unisex, so make sure you get involved and sample the delights of Fragrance du Bois. For all the Criminal Connection podcast crew, we've got a special discount for you. 10% off. All you need to do when you click on the link below and choose your luxury fragrance is to put in CCPOD10 for the 10% discount.
Tell us why you did it, Turbo. Did what? Why you beat him senseless? He was already senseless. Are you saying you did it? Of course I didn't fucking do it. It could have been any one of 100 people because no one fucking likes him. The only reason he's saying it's me is because I kept phoning him up about the £300 that he owed me. And I said that I would actually fucking punch him in the face when I saw him. I called him on the day when he did get smashed up. So he's obviously put 2 and 2 together and got 24. Then Ix took the stand. He came across exactly how I described him. Twitching like Bill Oddie in an Avery, scratching away and all jittery. I doubt anyone in the room didn't think he was on drugs within seconds of seeing him. Hopefully, I thought, they're going to start to believe my word because of my accurate description. The best of all was when Jane ambushed him over his call a few days before the trial, when he demanded 10 grand not to turn up in court. He was stunned, frozen, like a rabbit in the headlights, not knowing how to react or what to say. And the great thing was that he didn't have to say a thing because his expression said everything. He was caught out, banged to rights, and was fucked. When I was called up, I was in the dock for a fucking whole day. And that was stressful because you cannot relax because you are being cross-examined, you're being scrutinised by the barristers, and you are being asked the same questions over and over again to highlight any inconsistencies. The thing that I was trying to convey, that although I was a little bit rough around the edges, I hadn't committed the offence I was accused of. If I showed any hint of a bad side to my personality at any time, if I lost my temper, if I swore, the jury would assume I was a bad person. The slightest mistake can cost you dearly. I mean, I was absolutely exhausted when I was finally allowed to step down. I'd done all I could to put my side of the story across and to convince everyone in there of my innocence. And there was absolutely no way of second guessing how well I performed. Performance seems an odd way of terming it, but that's exactly how I see it. Being in court is like being on stage. The CID was called back in. He went back on the stand and he told the court that I hadn't phoned to put the record straight about the car, but had phoned him to confess all. I mean, was this geezer fucking for real? He was certainly trying to give that impression. Jane pointed out to him that I was pleading not guilty to all charges and asked why I'd phoned the CID to confess my guilt. More to the point, why would I do that when I knew all calls were either recorded or a precise record of them would have been kept? That precise record. If you say something so incriminating in court, you need to be able to back it up with evidence. Jane asked for the recording of the conversation to be played or a detailed description of it to be circulated. Silence. Mr. CID had really fucked up. He couldn't find his notes. Unfortunately, even though he wrote it all down word for word, he must have put it somewhere so safe that not even he could locate the said document. That's very convenient, said Jane. This CID geezer had nothing else to say. Well, there's nothing he could say, you know. When Stuart was called up to speak on my behalf, the issue of his previous conviction was always going to come up. He addressed the jury saying he had been wrongly convicted and always stood by this claim. He said he was an innocent man and so was I. It was great that he was still prepared to speak the truth, even when he'd been warned not to. Something he knows I appreciate so much. The star witness, though, was Frances at Charter Cannon, who was there to basically knock down the bollocks about the car. She absolutely took no shit from anyone and had a fucking huge pair of balls for a woman. Fully in control, she said, I had the car that day. Here's a receipt from the garage stating when mine was being serviced. Here's a list of all the people I met in those days I had the car, who will all tell you that I was driving it. On the final day of the trial, both barristers summed up their cases for the jury. The prosecuting barrister went through a story that no one in their right mind would believe, even if they'd seen it at the cinema, let alone for real. Jane made a really funny comment that it sounded like the plot to a Tarantino film gone wrong. There were no fingerprints or other forensic evidence to link me to the scene because I hadn't been there. There was no independent witnesses, and my mobile phone signal wasn't triangulated to Oxford. There was no CCTV footage from any of the garages along the motorway or on the motorway itself where I would have had to refuel or where I'd have had to drive along to get to Oxford. There was no footage of my little old white Seat Toledo trundling up north. I didn't have any because no such footage existed. Jane asked the jury to think about it logically and sensibly because there's a lot at stake here. She left them to answer this question. Would one man drive from Camberley to Plumstead in southeast London to pick up 3 other men and then drive to Oxford in broad daylight to beat up someone we're all wearing knuckle dusters because of a £300 debt and leave empty-handed? If their answer was yes, I would be guilty and I would get sent down for probably a 5-year stretch. I looked every one of the jury members in the eye as she asked that question. The jury were then ushered out to make their final decision. The spokesman came in, stood up, told the court they'd been unable to reach a decision. I wanted to shout, "You're fucking joking. How could they not see the facts?" If I really wanted that guy fucked over, I would not have done it myself. Do you know what I mean? How hard was that for anybody to fucking grasp? The judge then directed them to go back and to base their decision on the evidence. Look at what little proof there is to suggest that Mr. Turbo's guilty. If you think there is enough evidence to place him at the scene of the crime, then you can say so. I mean, he didn't say that, but you know what I mean. All words to that effect. He then said he would accept a majority decision, and if that didn't come, he would go for a retrial and then send them back out. After an hour, they were back with a decision. It was 10-2 in favour of not guilty. I don't think I've been as happy. I mean, those 5 years may as well have been the death penalty. And getting not guilty meant I was free of this nightmare that had lasted for the best part of a year. The really puzzling part for me was how 2 of them actually thought I'd done it. But fuck them. Jane Terry stood up after the verdict to ask for my costs to be paid. The judge ruled that if I'd told the cops everything in the interview and assisted properly in the arrest interview, it wouldn't even have gone to trial. So I could basically stick out my arse. It is what it is. The money was a side issue anyway. The good news is this nightmare had come to a fucking close. This nightmare had come close to costing me fucking everything. So in the grand scheme of things, a few grand was an easy pill to swallow. Don't get me wrong, 5 grand was 5 grand, but 5 years would have been a killer. I'd already lost 9 months of my life and temporarily my fucking sanity. But I was out of there, thank God. It was actually quite alarming that some prick could just go and make up a story like that. And so many people would actually take it seriously enough to bring it to court and waste a lot of time, money and resources to do so. They should have actually fucking done him, you know. Once out of court, I took a deep breath and filled my lungs full of fresh air. I'd actually come to the point where I fucking hated Oxford. When your whole life has been jeopardised like that, you learn to start appreciating it more. That night, I rounded up some of my closest friends to go out on a massive bender. Hannah, my girlfriend at the time, actually stood by me through all of this nonsense. And she was a tower of strength for me, to be fair. I've seen off the tax and the VAT people, and now the police. And I've been in the right too. I got on the phone and ordered a limousine stocked with champagne. And that night we travelled in style. And we actually went out for the whole weekend and had a great time. Going clubbing and celebrating my freedom. 2.5 days later, the celebrating was out of my system. And I was on a bit of a huge come down, really, to assess what I'd been through. I couldn't sit around and dwell on what could have happened, though. Thinking about what ifs is counterproductive. You need to learn from stuff that happens and move on. I'd certainly learned from this one. If anything bad can happen, it may well do. And it will happen when you least expect it to. It was like karma, you know. I'd done things in the past that I'm not too proud of and some things that no one will ever know about. And this was payback, a wake-up call. If I'd gone to prison, it would have been my past catching up with me, you know. This time I'd been not guilty, but in the past, maybe I wasn't so innocent. Now that slate was wiped clean and it was time to start again. Only this time, one mistake could be my last. It was time to stop fucking around and realise that there was so much going on that I could easily mess up. To have the threat of losing everything like that really makes you look at how you live your life. I actually started to calm down. I tried to stop losing my temper as much. I gave up every hedonistic trait as if I just put them all in a bag and threw them away. No more alcohol, no more silliness, and no more surrounding myself with the kinds of people who could potentially fucking get me thrown into jail. I actually felt like the man upstairs had given me a chance to put everything behind me, like it was all or nothing. But fuck it. It was over and I won. And fuck me. What a relief. Thank you so much for tuning in to this week's episode of King of Clubs. I hope you've enjoyed the trip down memory lane. Make sure you like, make sure you subscribe, make sure you tell all your friends about us and we will see you next Wednesday on the other side.